Hi everyone, a brief note before this episode begins. We recorded it along with a number of our upcoming episodes before October 7th, when war broke out in Israel and Gaza. We, and I'm sure just about all of you listening, are holding feelings of deep despair and anger and frustration as we pray for the healing of our world. We released this episode while holding pain in our hearts, and if now is not the time for you to listen to something that will feel separated from the tragedy of our moment right now, just save this episode for a later date. You can come back to it. If now would be precisely the moment to take a second and consider the future of our Jewish community in a conversation that does not tie directly to Israel-Palestine, we invite you to listen in. Support for this episode comes from the Diller Teen Tikkun Olam Awards. Do you know a teen leader changing the world? 15 recipients of the Diller Teen Tikkun Olam Awards will receive $36,000 each to recognize their community service and leadership. The awards honor young changemakers who embody the value of Tikkun Olam, repairing the world. Nominate a teen today, or they can apply directly by January 5th. Learn more at dillerteenawards.org.
This is Judaism Unbound, episode 400, Becoming Jewish, Building Judaism Together. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofberg.
And we are here in episode 400. Lex, you know about numbers. I think that's like a significant Jewish number because that's certainly 10 times 40. But I think, were we slaves in Egypt for 400 years? Or?
Yes. At least in one spot, there's this Genesis moment where it says there's going to be 400 years of terribleness. And then later, I think it says like 430. But 400, we're going to take that one today.
Any other 400s?
Well, you'd know this one better than me, but I believe in that story that you love from the Talmud where they let a bunch of new people into the class, doesn't it expand by like 400 people or something?
Yeah, there's a debate whether it's 400 or 700, which I guess are both like Jewish numbers as I think about them, 40 and 7, with zeros added to the end.
Exactly. So yeah, I would add that one, that like when we build the Jewish communities that we need in the world, we see at least 400 new special things, special people arrive. So that's what our episodes are, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess that means that we have at least 300 more to go because we're going to have that debate in the future whether there were 700 or 400 Judaism Unbound episodes.
That's right. And I assure everyone out there, as much as we've been doing this for 7 years now, we did not actually prep this in real time droshing. We have had a lot of time to, but we didn't. So this is truly off the cuff. So yeah, that's the 400 depth that we get from our sacred tradition.
Yeah, so before we jump into this 400th conversation, we just want to mention that we are so thrilled that the Onion Yeshiva has launched and all our new classes are up and going. And we have an extra special thing. It's kind of a class. It's kind of a little different that Lex is super involved with and in a better position to talk about than I am. So Lex, why don't you tell us a little bit about what's happening?
Yes. So we have an experience. I'm not calling it a course. And Sean Harris, who's teaching it, is not calling it a course. But this will be an experiment for us, 6 weeks. It's called Dungeons and Dragons and Dreidels, which will be a Jewish D&D experience. So some of you are hearing that and you're like, oh my gosh, I love D&D. I've been doing it for years. This course is for you. Some of you are hearing this and you're like, people seem to talk about this Dungeons and Dragons thing a lot. And like, maybe that's for me. I don't know. Like, this is also for you. So you should head to judaismunbound.com/classes, check out the full description, and sign up for this uncourse experience that's Dungeons and Dragons and Dreidels.
Awesome. So I'm not sure exactly how to pivot from that to our discussion of our conversion series. I think that there's something there that I'm not quite, I mean, you're talking about real-time droshing. You know, I feel like there's something here because I feel like for me, Dungeons and Dragons is this thing that I've known about since I was a kid and yet never fully got into. And it feels kind of mysterious and it feels a little bit alluring, but also a little bit prohibitive, a little bit scary. And I imagine that that's how a lot of people think about Judaism. So maybe there's something more deep that one could say. But,
no, that's good. That's the one.
Yeah. All right. Well, so let's talk about this conversion series because I want to talk about it on two levels. One is that, first of all, I just found it to be an awesome series. And by the way, I think that a lot of other people found it an awesome series, in part because we got a lot of emails, but also you were saying before we came on the air that we had 50,000 downloads of Judaism Unbound in the last month. And anyway, all of which is to say that it seems like there's a lot of people out there that are interested in this topic. we mentioned this when we talked with B'nai Lappi, because this was a similar conversation that we've been having on the Oral Talmud, which is that when we're talking about conversion to Judaism, we are talking about conversion to Judaism, and we're also not talking about conversion to Judaism, in the sense that, not that we're not talking about it, but that a lot of the ideas that are relevant to conversion to Judaism are relevant beyond conversion. They're relevant to people that were born Jewish, who are basically saying, but the Judaism that I was born into was not particularly compelling to me. And then as an adult, Sarah Hurwitz was a great example of this. As an adult, I'm somehow exposed to a version of Judaism that I never knew about before, and I'm captivated by that Judaism. And so I wonder whether in the future, and I think we've talked about this before, there wouldn't be such a distinction between conversion and being born Jewish, that Judaism might be something that for most Jews is something that they encounter in adulthood, no matter who their parents were. And the Judaism that they make part of their adult life is a new Judaism to them. And therefore, it is quite analogous to converting to Judaism, whether or not they were born Jewish.
Yeah, I really agree with that. I do want to spend some time, and I know you do too, on the pieces that are about conversion directly, but to say a little bit more about how this set of conversations opens up a lot more beyond just conversion. I think I've realized the last few years that, like, I don't know, when I'm in Jewish spaces that feel alive and energized and worthwhile and meaningful and justice-driven, et cetera, all the things I want Jewish spaces to be, usually the people at the center of them and a lot of the people who are attending, so those leading, those attending, have had periods of life where they have sort of drifted out of Judaism. Or they've had periods of life where they weren't Jewish, which is to say they started life not Jewish and became Jewish. But I've realized, like, I actually think that a problem we have is that we think that if somebody goes through a time period where Judaism is not working for them, where they're not spending time in Jewish spaces, whatever, where it feels distant, we think that's a real big problem that needs to be solved. And it's not that I wish that on anyone, but what I can say about myself as somebody who has had stretches where I felt deeply distant from certainly Jewish institutions and occasionally from Jewish tradition more broadly, although that's happened less frequently for me, I think it is so important. And I think that it actually strengthens my relationship to Jewish history, Jewish collective, to have moments of not knowing my place there, of not feeling part. And then when I'm in spaces where others have also felt on the margins in Jewish spaces, some for identity-based reasons, others for ideology-based reasons, others, whatever, I find that that set of people, they won't settle for a Judaism that is boring and just going through the motions or doing what we're supposed to, because that, for some period of their life, didn't work. And if they converted, it's not that it necessarily didn't work, but it's that they had a moment in their life where they didn't have deep, rich, meaningful Jewish experiences. And so when they're going to be involved with creating them, now that they are Jewish, like, why would we have it be stale and boring? I want to sit with how having moments in life of either people just not being Jewish or being in a space where Jewish institutions aren't working, where Jewish teachings don't feel like they fit, may actually generate the kinds of Judaism we need, because at that point, that's when your sort of seed is planted to fix the problems.
I've been talking lately about the way that the Jewish organizational world, the large organization world, thinks of the challenge of Jewish life in the 21st century. And the image that I'm playing around with is like, imagine a basket and all the Jews are in this basket and the basket's edges are fraying and the Jews are kind of falling out of this basket. I feel like the usual approach is to say, can we repair the edges of the basket? You know, it can fray, and and the idea, at least, is that it used to be that these holes were smaller, and now they're getting bigger, and these Jews are falling out. And what do you think the response should be to a basket that's fraying like that? One possibility is to try to repair the basket, but the other possibility is to try to keep people away from the edges of the basket. And how would you do that? I think you would put something really compelling and exciting in the middle of the basket, and then all the people would run to the compelling thing, and they wouldn't be anywhere near the edge of the basket, so they wouldn't be able to fall out. So what I'm suggesting is, and by the way, while they're running to the inside for a while, you have a lot more time to repair the basket because people aren't falling out while you're trying to do the repair. So what I'm saying is that rather than working kind of at the margins to try to prevent Jews from falling out of this basket, what would it look like to create something so exciting, so compelling that everybody's running toward it? And I think the world of conversion to Judaism gives us a sense of what that might look like, because the folks who are coming to convert to Judaism are not people that are on the edge of not converting. It's not like they're kind of, oops, they might have not converted. They're on the edge of a basket. It's like, no, these are people that are pretty far away in most cases from being Jewish. And something is so compelling to them that they're running towards it. So if we could understand more deeply what that is that folks who were not born Jewish are running toward, it feels to me like it would also give a guide to people that are trying to make things compelling for people that were born Jewish. But I've been talking about this TED Talk that I love by Benjamin Zander, who's the conductor of the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra. And he talks about in the classical music world that studies show that 3% of Americans like classical music. And he says most people in the classical music world say, if we could only get that number to 4%, our problems would be over. And my analog in the Jewish world is saying, we have 7 million Jews in America. If we could only prevent it from going to 6.5 million, we would have done our generation's holy work. If Judaism is really worth preserving so much that we want to make sure that we don't even lose any Jews out of the edge of this basket, wouldn't it be important enough that we should say it can be for lots of other people? And there are actually a way larger number of people that are not Jewish than people that are Jewish. So if we took seriously the idea that Judaism is worthwhile, wouldn't we have an enormous number of people converting to Judaism that would dwarf the number of people that are born Jewish, such that actually the entire focus should be more on not proselytizing, maybe yes, proselytizing. I'm not saying one way or the other, but I'm saying at least having the doors wide open would probably result, given what I'm kind of seeing on the ground, I could imagine a world that results in there being 50 million Jews in America. And
sure,
maybe that's something that we should be more actively talking about.
Well, so, okay, this basket thing is fun. I want to play with the basket, and it's going to be incoherent. And so all of you listening are going to have to bear with this basket analogy, because I'm like, and tell us your own versions of it too. But I thought you were going to go a different direction. When you said at the beginning, there's two different ways to think about this, that like people are falling off the edge. How do we prevent them from falling off the edge? And then you posed as a second, let's just have something in the middle. It's like a magnet like if it's if there's like a really strong magnet and all Jews are magnetized so that we get pulled towards the center,
right.
Like attractive in the literal sense of attractive,
right.
Like by physics. I thought you were going to say something else. And so I will just say it. I thought you were going to say that, okay, if people are falling off the edge, it could be that, oh my gosh, woe is me, they're lost to the basket. Or we could have outside of the basket a bunch of baskets, like new baskets to catch them, or one big new basket to catch them. And the reason why I thought you were going to say that is because, so let's picture this. So we've got one basket over here. I'm holding my hand on the left side of the screen or whatever. And people are falling out of that basket for a set of reasons. They could fall into a basket that also people who were not in the first basket could fall into. That's yes. That's people who are converting to Judaism. So like it's sort of like we've got this new thing that people both from Judaism, so to use a phrase that we've critiqued a lot in this unit, Jews by birth, quote unquote. I don't have a less messy version of that. People who have never thought of themselves as a thing that isn't Jewish could fall into that basket. And people from all the world's other baskets who are falling out of those baskets for a wide variety of reasons. They're falling out of Christianity's basket. They're falling out of Muslims' basket. They're falling out of like secularism's basket. We'd have another one. So that I think could be cool. But the other thing I want to say is it's not just that people are falling. The reason why I was going to like a colander or something with like holes in it, I'm imagining a basket that had certain shaped holes that certain rocks or whatever would fall through and others wouldn't. It's not just that like some Jews are losing interest in Judaism. We could actually identify a set of reasons why Jews
are feeling alienated by Jewish institutions. Some of them are discrimination and being subject to microaggressions. Some of them are a misalignment of ideology. Some of the, so like there's identity reasons, there's belief-based reasons. Some of them are just, it's not that there's like a deep misalignment, but it's like, this is just not interesting to me. I feel like I can find more sophisticated, more stimulating ways of being in the world in other baskets. Those are people that are maybe not falling off the edge. I think that implies that they're trying to stay. I think they're like diving off the deep end. And we think it's a roof of a building and diving off is death. But turns out there's actually a really wonderful swimming pool a few feet below that they're diving into because it's fun to swim in. And the water's nice and it's pretty. And I actually think that what many of us are, I would say I've dove off a certain sense of what Judaism is, and I'm like no longer in that.
Yeah.
Like I struggle when I spend time in like a synagogue space, even synagogues that are pretty good. Like it just feels like it's not sort of me. And then when I spend time with other people who have had that dissatisfaction in the way I talked before, the people who have felt marginalized in those spaces, who are a certain shape that is falling through a certain hole, that feels amazing. I mean, I'm fresh. We're recording this during Sukkot, and I'm fresh off last night having an amazing Sukkot gathering that kind of could only work. We had it at our house, and it only works if you're sort of a little bit out of the traditional system, because we held it on October 1st, which is the first day of Spooky Month, and we blended everything Halloween and Sukkot. We had scary stories related to the Torah. We had witch paraphernalia on the walls and pumpkins and mixed with etrogs and whatever, all this stuff. And like, from some people's vantage point, that is deeply heretical and off. It's out of the basket. It's a different basket. And I actually, there was a time where I would have argued with them and said, no. Like, this is still what you're doing. It's just a new version of it. Like, I think we're doing a new enough version that it's its own basket. So that's why I'm saying I don't know if the metaphor is repelling people to the middle of the basket, because I think more and more of us, we actually like being on the edges of things. We're not, more and more of us want to be diving off from the edge, specifically Davka, and not necessarily running towards a center. And so that's not to say, like, I think you're not going to strongly disagree with me. It's just sort of, let's play with this metaphor.
No, this is a very well taken amendment. Because actually, in my own metaphor, that's one of the things that I've really struggled with in trying to use this metaphor of the basket with the holes in it, and also what the alternative is to put a magnet in the middle of the basket. And it has exactly the flaw that you're talking about, which is that, no, we don't probably imagine, at least in the short term, a version of Judaism that everybody's going to run towards that's kind of at the center of this basket. And I like what you're describing about like another basket. And it also fits better with the paradigm of disruptive innovation that I've talked about many times, where what disruptive innovation really is about is essentially, like you say, creating a new basket outside the periphery, because you're talking about still, and I get that I introduced this, but that people are diving off the Jewish basket into this other basket. But you mentioned earlier that the having a new basket also allows people that are not coming from the Jewish basket to jump in.
And the new basket, it looks enough like the first basket that it's like a Jewish basket, but it also, like, there's new textures to it or something. Like, we have to figure this out, because it's not an un-Jewish basket. It's just a differently Jewish basket.
No, and it may have been true that at different times in history, let's say in the 1950s, when people might have been shrying, that's a Yiddish word for screaming, that the Jews are assimilating, they're leaving. It may be that new basket hadn't really been built yet. And so maybe there was a way of thinking that, they really are jumping out of the Jewish basket and they're kind of going nowhere. They're not they're going nowhere Jewish. Over time, though, and this is where I think a lot of the institutions haven't fully realized that this has happened, that a lot of people have been working out in that space outside the basket, building a new basket. Now that people are jumping out of the Jewish basket, or falling out, but then jumping out of the old Jewish basket, isn't that they're jumping out of Judaism, they're jumping to the new Jewish basket, which, by the way, also has a lot of people that were not born Jewish. And this is something that I want to raise, because it came up early on to some extent in our conversation with Juan Mejia, in a different way in our conversation with David Walensky, that there's a real issue with conversion that has to be kind of thought about. And really, I think each person has to think about it for themselves, which is how important is it that, quote, the Jewish community accept your conversion, accept you as a Jew? Because if you say that it's really important to me that, quote, every Jew or every Jewish community will accept me as a Jew, then you are stuck using the most extreme version of conversion, or nearly the most extreme, like to say, well, I have to do it the way that, to stereotypically say it, the Orthodox will accept, that if the Orthodox accept me, then everybody will accept me. And if I don't want to do Orthodox, then I'll do conservative because then almost everybody will accept me. And people start to think that way, and I totally understand it. And by the way, I totally acknowledge that I'm saying this from a place of privilege, that I was born to two Jewish parents whose Judaism was never questioned, and so nobody doubts my Judaism that I'm aware of. But I think that there would be great power in not doing it that way. There would be a great power in saying, I want to convert to Judaism for the new basket. And I understand that there are a lot of people currently in the old version, the old basket, who are not going to accept me as Jewish. And my response to them is that in 100 years, that won't be the case. In 100 years, the basket that I have joined will be seen as the basket, and everybody will accept everybody there as a Jew. But that requires a certain amount of courage. You could call it courage. You could call it recklessness even. You know, Miriam Turlinchamp and I are teaching this Intro to Judaism class right now. And one of the questions is, should we at some point do Judaism Unbound conversions, or at least have a network of people who lead Unbound conversions that are within the Judaism Unbound way of thinking, whether we as an organization are explicitly part of it or not. But basically, these people wouldn't necessarily be rabbis. They wouldn't necessarily be doing it according to the legal approach, right? They may not require circumcision. They may not require the same amount of learning that a lot of places require. They may not require that you live as a Jew in some way for a period of time before you convert. And I would personally say that that approach would be more similar to what we saw in the Talmud when we talked about with B'nai Lappi. But regardless of that, a world in which there are unbound conversions would be a world in which the people converted through unbound conversions might not be accepted as Jewish by a number of Jewish communities. And I think that's a really important thing that we have to think through. And I think that ultimately people like you and me have to help people feel okay about that. And that's where I'm struggling. I'm not sure, partly because I'm doing this from a place of privilege, like I'm not sure how to help. I know that the result ultimately has to be that people will say, I don't care if the Orthodox community will accept me as Jewish or not, because I'm building a new kind of Judaism together with all these other Jews and all these other Jews that were either born Jewish or that also converted to Judaism. And that's the world that I want to live in. But I get that that's going to require more bravery from the people converting to Judaism than it is going to require from me.
Yeah, I really hear you on all of that. And I think the amount that we grant power to Orthodoxy, and also on this topic, it's not just Orthodoxy, it's the state of Israel. Because so often what comes up, I mean, and there's a blur between that, because in Israel, like, the Orthodox rabbinate has control over a lot of things. But like, we actually have some agency in how much power those bodies are given. It's not that we have infinite agency. And again, like you, I was born to Jewish parents, and I haven't had to go from out to in. And so I think about what we could gain if people refused to grant that power. I think less about what that person could lose if they're unwilling to grant that power. And so they convert through apparatuses that make them only conditionally Jewish in some spaces. Like, in my body, I haven't had that happen. And so I can't speak to that from experience. I do think that if we envision a world in which people will not have to make that choice because that power does not dwell in Orthodoxy and in the state of Israel, people have to opt to do other forms of conversion and mark them as legitimate. and not continue to make it seem like the most valid paths are Orthodox, the second most valid paths are conservative, and then everybody else. I will say, I think this is starting to happen. Like, there are people for whom it is important to be seen as Jewish across the board by all other Jewish communities, or as many as possible. There are other people who, and I've been in a few rooms where somebody is converting, and I'm one of the rabbis theoretically charged with, like, letting them in, quote unquote. It's a very strange role to be in for somebody who doesn't think that rabbis or even anyone should really have that gatekeeping power. But I've had it a few times. And there have been conversations in those spaces where it's like making sure you know that you will not be seen as Jewish in a certain set of communities. And then people respond, yeah, I know. Like, that's cool. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to those places. I'm not looking to move to Israel. I'm not looking to spend time in Orthodox spaces. So, like, from my perspective, that not only is that like a nice thing, that is an action that each time it happens serves a validating role for the future. It creates a larger critical mass of people who have converted and for whom orthodoxy has been irrelevant to the equation, for whom the state of Israel has been irrelevant to the equation, so that we can construct definitions of who counts, quote unquote, that are separate from that.
Right.
And parallel to all this, I do want to bring back the theme of the episode with Chris Bartlett, how we really need to think critically about the whole notion that there are two categories of people in the world, and they can be encapsulated by the words Jews and non-Jews, and that includes all the billions of people on the planet. Because I don't think it does. And I think that we do a huge disservice to a huge number of people when we fail to upend the binary that is. And I think it's actually in certain progressive spaces that I care a lot about getting worse, not better. There are some issues I think we are doing a good job on and building better communities around. We are starting to be more conscious around LGBTQ Jewish empowerment. We are starting a little bit to at least build communities that are aware of discrimination that is lobbed constantly at Jews of color. We're not there yet, but at least we are starting to talk about that. On conversion, on the notion of people who don't think of themselves as Jewish, but spend time in our spaces and do so in positive, productive ways, more and more I'm hearing that those people are being shouted at online and told not to do X, Y, and Z, and told that they're culturally appropriating all this. And like, I gotta say, because I think that some of our listeners will agree with me and some won't. And I'm happy to field emails on this. I think this is a question that divides even very progressive, unbound kinds of Jews. I think we are doing unbelievable amounts of damage to Jews, like who are unquestionably Jewish for whatever set of reasons they converted, they did, and to people who are not Jewish, who are being taught to be very nervous about what they do in Jewish spaces or what they do in adjacent to Jewish spaces. And look, I'm not advocating for every non-Jew to like light their own Hanukkah candles or whatever, but I am asking, like, should the spouse of a Jew who has a night where they have to decide, do I light the candles or do I not because my husband's not here? Should that person feel like bad or mixed about lighting candles? I don't think they should. I think it's ludicrous to even pose that if that person would want to do, not every person wants to do that on their own, but like if they want to, that they would somehow not be permitted. And I think the reason why we have problematic and unhelpful conversations on that front is because we don't break down the difference between somebody who is full on not Jewish and has never spent time with Jews, and it would just be a mindless act, fetishism. We don't differentiate between those people and people who have a number of Jewish friends and have been shaped in interesting ways by Jewish context. That's like level 1A. Level 1B, people who like have committed relationships with those people. Level 1C, people who have family members who are not their committed. Like, I don't know. There's a million different situations. And I think we have to be doing a better job on that, because I'm sick of seeing the posts from really well-meaning, really lovely, wonderful people who are not Jews or who are partially or interestingly on the borderlines of Jewish, who are being shouted at to mostly be nervous about participating in anything Jewish because of appropriation, and not, wow, what an amazing thing that you want to be part of this space and that you want to bring your gifts and that you want to be affected by Jewish tradition.
I want to go into a taxonomy a little bit, but before we do that, I'm just wanting you to amplify a little bit more if you can say why this is so damaging.
So there's a number of levels. One, I think we are building communities where a large percent of the people in them are fearful a lot of the time. And the large community of people is people who are either not halakhically Jewish, sometimes like not legally marked as Jewish, but usually it's not even that. It's people who don't see themselves as Jewish, but are spending time in those spaces. And we're teaching people that they need to be tiptoeing. Again, I'm aware that there are problems that can arise when people appropriate Jewish ritual, but I'm asking folks to err on the side of what powerful, magical, amazing experiences can happen actually only when there are some people in the space who are not of the space. That when there are some people in the space for whom Jewish is not their identity, but it is something that they are receiving and sharing external to themselves. Because I can tell you, as somebody who is external to other groups, and when I am spending time in those groups, I actually think that I'm contributing something to those spaces. I don't think I'm just a bystander. Like, we have crafted an ideology where we think that people need to either be fully of something or fully external to it. And we've made people nervous. And I don't want to be in spaces where people are primarily super nervous. The other damage it does is that there are people who feel called to Judaism, who feel called to conversion even, for whom the act of conversion, forgetting like the act of lighting candle, like is being framed as a form of cultural appropriation. Like that is being taught. People are saying that. And there's a part of me that wants to say, yes, like if we strip appropriation of its connotations and we just talk about appropriating a thing, all of us appropriate things in our day-to-day lives, objects. Like there's an appropriations committee that is not about cultural appropriation, but it is a congressional committee.
Like we converted to our use.
Yeah, we have something that wasn't ours become ours. I do think we need to be able to say that some acts of appropriation are not deeply harmful. Others are. I'm really not saying it's all okay. Some acts of appropriation, like the act of becoming a religion that you weren't originally, are really meaningful and wonderful for the person doing it and for the community that receives their gifts and for the broader collective Jewish civilization writ large that receives their gifts. Like when we make it hard, when we make people feel like there's a bunch of barriers and that them doing a certain set of things would be transgressing, would be harmful. And we don't lead with the ways in which it would be amazing and positive. We do a disservice to those people and to our communities.
Yeah, there's so many levels. I mean, first of all, let's say somebody has a little bit of interest in possibly converting. I mean, this is the easiest case, but let's say somebody is just like, I feel sort of called to Judaism, but I'm not sure that I want to convert yet. I mean, first of all, a lot of times if somebody comes to a rabbi and says, I want to consider converting to Judaism, they say, well, you should live as a Jew for a year or whatever amount of time. So is it only that I have to get permission from a rabbi and then I can live as a Jew as a non-Jew? Or could I just start doing it myself? I mean, first of all, if you're sincerely motivated by saying, I want to try this on, then it feels to me like you should be allowed to self-determine in that regard. So that's an easy case, but can a person who is not Jewish, who is attached to a Jewish spouse or has Jewish kids or in some fashion, is part of a Jewish family, could they play a certain role in even a synagogue service like being called to the Torah?
And not just could they, should we be sculpting roles specific to them? Should we actually be like finding that
okay,
set of
well,
things?
Maybe it could be specific to them, but I'm just saying, like, why can't they do the thing that a Jew would do? And some people will say, oh, because it's really like a very sacred thing that a Jew does with God, et cetera, et cetera. But most Jews don't believe that. Most of the Jews that are in the room don't feel that the thing that they are doing when they are called to the Torah is sort of this act that only Jews can do. They feel like it's a ceremonial act that's part of a ceremony that they're part of. And so now I'm not saying that in a Jewish space that is committed to a different viewpoint than I just expressed, like Orthodox synagogue or a conservative synagogue, like I could see a world in which they're saying, look, we actually really do believe that this is a certain...
That's their basket.
Yeah, and this is a certain sacred act that only a Jew can do, like in the same way that you would say, like, only a priest can offer the sacrifice, only a Jew can make a blessing before the Torah. In certain places, yeah, I can accept that that's their view. But in a lot of more progressive Jewish spaces, I think there's just an assumption that, of course, somebody who's not Jewish couldn't be called to the Torah. I mean, they might be able to come and stand behind their spouse as they're saying the blessing. Maybe they can say it together with the Jewish spouse or something along those lines, but that they couldn't come up by themselves and say these blessings. Why? Why? And it feels to me like we don't even interrogate that question, and most spaces just assume. You know, I mean, like, there are people still celebrating that non-Jewish spouses can even be a member of a synagogue. I mean, it's so bizarre to me that this is even a question. But putting that aside, there's also all these other questions, like the ones that are more along the lines of your raising, that can a person who is not Jewish, who finds beauty in a Jewish practice. By the way, like a friend of ours, Casper ter Kuile, who is an amazing ritual thinker, he has adopted this practice of the Tech Shabbat, where on Saturday, he has made it his practice to shut off from technology, the same as Tiffany Shlain did. But Casper himself is not Jewish. Is somebody offended that Casper is culturally appropriating Judaism? Like, I think he gets.
I think some people are, and that's what scares me.
Yeah, I mean, I think they are, but I think that they're wrong to be, right? Meaning, like, I'm saying that Casper is saying, I found this beautiful practice within Judaism. Am I not able to rest from technology on Saturday? My feeling is like when Casper says that speaks to me, I'm so excited. I'm like, wow, a Jewish thing is speaking to somebody that in this case is not Jewish. But imagine if looking at how much Casper has connected to this idea of refraining from technology on Shabbat, which I know you have your own issues with about the technology piece. But when Casper, when Casper finds that attractive, to me, that says, number one, I have no problem with him doing it. And number two, it tells me, hey, that might be something that will appeal to a lot of Jews. So let's look at the fact that somebody who's not Jewish is interested in doing these Jewish things as a sign of maybe where the really good stuff is. And by the way, that's where I think we said this early on in the history of this podcast, that a lot of times in these transition points in Jewish history, there have been a lot of non-Jews involved. Jethro, for example, Moses' father-in-law, some people say that he did convert to Judaism, but there's no evidence of that. And there have been these people who are not Jewish that have been remembered by Jewish history and Jewish mythology as critically important to these periods of transition. And I think that part of what their superpower is the capacity to look at the material of Judaism and say, hey, this is really good, in a way that Jews look at it all as a big basket, so to speak, of stuff that they were oppressed by in their childhood, and they see it as all the same and all not good and not interesting, whereas somebody who's not Jewish can come and sort through it and say, hey, you know, you should give a second look to this idea of Shabbat. It's really cool.
Yeah, and the last thing that I feel called to really voice here, I mean, when we set out to do this unit of episodes on conversion, it was probably the easiest brainstorming session we've ever had around like who guests should be. There were so many people who have been on yeshiva students, people who are past guests on the podcast, people who are teaching in the world, people who work for organizations, people who have shared their story in whatever way. Like it was so fast. We had like a 30-minute check-in and generated way more names than we actually were able to have in this unit. And that's because converts are not only like enthusiastic and bring, like you said, they bring the ability to like notice, oh, we should take a second look at Shabbat. But in our world, in digital space, which is what our next unit of episode is going to be all about, exploring the digital Jewish ecosystem, converts are rocking it. Like, not only do we have many converts or Jews by choice, we've talked about terminology. Not only do we have many people who started their lives not Jewish, who are taking our on yeshiva courses, some of our classes, it's like close to the majority of the room. Some of our Elul Baum gatherings, I think it's been the majority of the room. Like, this is such an abundant gift to our communities, both in the practical sense that these are people who like allow some of our events to even exist and happen, and without them, they wouldn't be happening. And because the content of the conversations we have is so much richer. People share not just their anchors in life of how they grew up Jewishly, but how they grew up extra Jewishly, outside of Jewish. And that is not a separate thing, it turns out, from Jewish conversations. When you can share growing up in a conservative Christian community, the ways that harmed you and how that reminds you of something in a Jewish story, of a character who's like being oppressive in some way. When you can share of growing up fully secular and not feeling like you had a connection to X, Y, or Z and finding it through, like that actually does so much productive work in reminding us of what Judaism is even here for. And every barrier we have, from the ones you described of like, you have to spend a year being Jewish, to the ones that are like really explicit, like it is appropriative. And for you, a white person, to convert to Judaism, you would be doing a kind of harm. You're not an heir to the trauma that other Jews are an heir to, so you should be nervous about doing that. You're from a certain area of the world that has done harm to Jews, so if you were to convert, that's like all of these are things that people say. Every one of those barriers that we have in the grand sphere has an impact on some non-zero number of people, and they stack up and they stack up. And the damage here is not, we're 7 million Jews instead of 8, or 7 million Jews instead of 50. I do care about that a little. But the damage here is that the content of what those 7 million Jews and their Jewish loved ones and their non-Jewish loved ones and their adjacent to Jewish loved ones, the content of what they do is suffering because we don't have all of those people who bring a beautiful vision to the equation. So like, I want to name that, but I want to shine a light on the fact that digitally, that's who's in the spaces a lot of the time, like partially because they are by definition lower barrier, that nobody can check you at the door. I mean, you can kind of have waiting room things and whatever gates in some digital platforms, but mostly there isn't a way to keep out people. You can't have a fence and a lock and key in the same way. People often are tiptoeing into Jewish spaces digitally because they don't have to answer the hard questions. What are you? Who are you? How do you belong here? That's serving as a really important, like, feeling out zone. And then people are determining, you know what, I do want to convert. Or they're determining, you know what, I don't. But I want to have as a rhythmic part of my life being part of Jewish communal spaces, not as my own, but as something I can serve. I want to have people in my life who are leading Passover Seders and bringing something that I can to those spaces, not making them about Jesus, but bringing something. Like that can happen digitally in a really exciting way. And I think that there's this under the surface connection between all of the issues of inclusion and empowerment we've been talking about on conversion and the digital world, because the digital world by its very nature is more able to empower those people than a space where you have to show your membership, where you have to pay for your tickets, where you have to walk through a lock and key, through a fence, through whatever, past a security guard. Like, that's important.
Yeah, the digital element is huge because I think, like you say, fundamentally, digital Judaism, it just doesn't have the gates to keep. Like you say, it does have a few, and you can put them up if you want to, but they are harder to put up. They're not natural in the space, like any gates. I mean, any gates ultimately have to be built. It's just that maybe it's less about the digital and more that it's just a new land, as we've talked about. And in any new land, you're going to have to decide to build walls and fences and gates or not. And right now, in the digital space, there aren't that many walls and fences and gates. As a result, the capacity to flow into and out of Jewish digital spaces is huge. And in a sense, the question is what is to be done about that? And in that sense, I think we're talking to at least three different types of people in this podcast in general and today. One is people who are not currently Jewish. I don't want to say anything insulting to my fellow current Jews out there, but I'm saying that my experience is that anytime I'm hanging out with somebody who is converting to Judaism or recently converted to Judaism, I'm pretty happy. I'm a lot more happy than I am most of the time. So for me, I'm saying, like, I want to hang out with you. Please maybe let me into your space, right? Or, come on and let's create this together. I think that we're also talking to our kind of core listeners who are generally inclined to want to be very open the way that we're talking about. But every once in a while, like you mentioned earlier, have some place where they try to build some gates and build some fences. And I want to say to them, can we encourage you more and more to imagine what might a world look like if you didn't put up that gate? Is it so bad? Is it so scary? Is it so problematic? Or are you actually holding a vestige of the place from where you already came? You already jumped out of the basket, but maybe you brought something with you, a pecola, as my grandmother would say, like a little pack of stuff. And maybe you don't need to have that pecola with you. And what would it look like if we had an even more open place there? And that's where, I'll bring in again, I know I'm a broken record on it, but that text about Rabban Gamliel and how he was thrown out and how Elazar ben Azariah came and removed the guards from the gates. I love how it's literally saying he stopped gatekeeping. And then Rabban Gamliel, the person who was gatekeeping, saw all the people flowing in and said, perhaps I've withheld the Torah from Israel. And I want us to imagine that we may be the Rabban Gamliel in that story, right? We may be the ones who didn't even realize that we were gatekeeping. And as soon as we can get ourselves out of the head of gatekeeping, we might see so many people flowing in that we would say, oh my gosh, I've withheld the Torah from the new Israel, right? From the expanded Israel. And we should take that really seriously. And then there's the third audience that I think is out there. It's part of this audience. We know that it is. We don't pitch this podcast to this audience generally. We don't generally talk to this audience explicitly, although I think sometimes you and I have our own baggage from the kind of old school world of Judaism, which is, people that are kind of more or less content in the world of existing Jewish organizations, synagogues, and other things that are in the more established denominations, and that I want to not be saying to them necessarily that you need to change the way you're doing things. I respect that they have reasons for maybe why they want to be a certain way. I wish they wouldn't have those reasons. I wish that they will be more open, but I get that maybe they don't feel that they can be. And what I would just say to them is, don't put down the other basket. Don't cast aspersions on the other basket. It may be that there's a schism coming and we're going to see a break. And it may be more likely, in my opinion, that in a few decades from now, eventually the new basket gets so awesome. And this is also the story of disruptive innovation. The new basket gets so awesome, so well developed that it doesn't feel actually like a new basket anymore to the people from the old basket. And they start to be able to, instead of having to jump in, they can just walk right in. I would hope that the folks out there from the old basket can imagine a world, and it's not scary, it's not horrible. It's a world that says, yeah, I'm not ready to go over there yet, but I'm really excited to understand that it turned out that it wasn't just people falling out of the basket into nowhere. There was actually this new basket being built. Lex, I really appreciate your having amplified the metaphor there. And I just didn't notice it because maybe I was too far from the edge of the basket that I couldn't even look over to see that there's actually a new awesome basket down there. And I'm willing to not only allow that to be happening, but I'm going to be excited about it. I'm going to just kind of watch and wait and do my own thing and let it be.
Yeah, and so just to close things out, I want to be really clear. I think this is soaked through, but just to say it really explicitly, if you began your life not Jewish and you became Jewish, you're great. And we are so excited that you are here in this collective to bring your gifts, whether those gifts are things that you've gained since you became Jewish or they're gifts that you've had your whole life and maybe even come from elements of your life experience that were, pre-Jewish. And to people who are listening who aren't Jewish at all and are not looking to be, but for whatever reason, you feel like your relationship to Jewish civilization, to Judaism, it's not nothing. You're not non-Jew as the most primary thing about your relationship to Jew or to Jewish. I really want to honor and celebrate that too. And if you are Jewish and you've been Jewish your whole life, but you feel like you sort of just adopted this thing, you feel like you had a long stretch of your life where Judaism was not present, that's amazing too. That's not like, I wish that hadn't happened. No, I think and I hope that moment of distance, whether it was 50 years of your life growing up where you didn't really have much Jewish experience and now you're adopting it as an elder, or you just had a few years of, I feel so alienated. I feel like every time I walk into a Jewish space, I'm the outsider. That has helped shape you and given you gifts that you can then bring back to Jewish spaces and empower others with. So we're grateful to you too. So I did not name in there people who have been Jewish their whole lives and have felt entirely comfortable with it. I actually don't think I'm erasing that many folks because I think there's not that many people who fit there. So that's how we're going to close this unit. I'm really, really, this time the word is grateful for all of you who are out there listening. And we'll put all the episodes from this unit in the show notes. So if you missed 1 or 2 or 5, you can go back and listen. But here are all the ways you can be in touch with us with your questions, your thoughts, your ideas, all of that good stuff. There's our email addresses I'm going to start with this time, dan@judaismunbound.com and lex@judaismunbound.com. There's our website, judaismunbound.com, where there's show notes, where you can find the past episodes, all that good stuff. And there's our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram handles. All of those are @JudaismUnbound. So thanks to all of you for listening. Share this with friends. Let us know how these episodes spoke to you. And the last thing I'll say is that support for this episode of Judaism Unbound comes from the Ashman Family JCC in Palo Alto, California, whose vision is to be the architects of the Jewish future. The Ashman Family JCC empowers you to experience Jewish paths toward a life of joy, purpose, and meaning through innovative Jewish learning and wellness programs, community building, and initiatives to develop the next generation of Jewish leaders. Learn more at www.paloaltojcc.org. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.